Hey everyone, it's Matt Carl at LeRoy Heritage Museum, and I just want to take an opportunity to give an introduction to the video footage you're about to see. I actually shot this video footage about a year and a half ago, showing the inside of what used to be the Lewis Brothers store inside the hotel building, and I did a walkthrough showing how the store was laid out, and that is what you'll see here. We've done a lot of work on that room since then. We put down a whole new subfloor and other things, and so it has changed since then, but this will give you an opportunity to see what we found when we opened it up and got ready to do renovation. The picture you're looking at right now is actually the best picture we've ever been able to find showing the storefront as it originally was. And the inside of the store we've never seen a picture of, other than to see this video footage today and understand what the layout was based on what we could see on the floor and on the walls and ceilings. So I hope you'll enjoy this video footage and learn a little bit about the part of the building that used to be the store. Now we're looking at the front of the building here, and this is where the storefront for the Lewis Brothers General Merchandise store was located when the building first opened. And so there are two sets of windows here that face Route 414. But when this building was built, these would have been large plate glass windows, and that is why there is wainscoting missing from the wall here. Try to get a closer look. You can see wainscoting is what originally was on the wall in this part of the building. Now this part of the building was a store, and the rest of the building was a hotel along with a ballroom. But the front here of the store had display windows in it, as well as an inset front door. So if you look at the ceiling here, you can see where the original inset door was located. Had double doors. We assume, just like the LeRoy General store has. So you can see where they tore those out many years ago and then just filled in with any tongue and groove wood that they could find. But if we come back over here and we look at the wall, you can see it's tongue and groove, and you can get an idea of how large the windows were. They would have filled this entire space here that's now covered by plastic. Now we know that they were display windows because if you look down here at the bottom, you can see where the raised floor was inside the display window. And you can see, if you take a real close look, you can see where the floor of this display window kind of had a molding piece that ran along the edge of it. So this is where people from LeRoy would come and find things that they were looking for, perhaps while they were waiting for the carriage to come, for the stagecoach to come, or whatever they were here for. The display window probably would have drawn them in off the street. So if you look at the floor, the section that was underneath where the display windows are, they were just filled in, perhaps later on, just to make a floor out of this area once the storefront was taken out. But you can see the old wood here. On this side that I'm looking at, you can still see where the wall was, so apparently the floorboards on this side were actually original. And then this section right here in the center, you can see where the front doors were here towards the bottom of the screen. The door threshold would be right there, and then the gray flooring, it would be part of the original porch on the front of the building. So when you would enter the store, this is where many people from LeRoy over the years entered into the Lewis Brothers store, probably a lot of ancestors of people who were watching this video. And then, as I mentioned, over to the other side, it appears that This section was just filled in later on to flatten out the floor. In this corner of the room, there's a door cut here. There was not a door in this location originally, however. This was actually just part of the wall and just a side portion of the display window that was here. This door would have been cut in here, I believe, by Stanley Morse when he came here and briefly had his funeral home here, and his wife had a shop in this side of the house as well. And so we believe that door was cut in there at that time. So the only door that would have come into this room from the rest of the building originally is located over in the center of the picture here where the plywood is located. And behind there is just an opening in the wall. But we can see where the trim originally had been, so we know that there was a door there connecting the store to the hotel portion of the building. So if we come back and look up towards the ceiling, you can see where there had been crown molding around the room, and most of the crown molding was still in place, but the previous owner removed it and reinstalled it in a different room in the building. And so there's only pieces left to it, and our intention is to have that crown molding remade, recut exactly what was there, and to put it back into place in order to make the room back into what it originally looked like. At this point, if you look at the ceiling, this stained ceiling that's shown right here is exactly what the store ceiling originally had looked like when the store was in operation. Later on, when alterations were made, part of the ceiling was painted green. And that paint is actually lead paint. And so the green paint is not going to be touched. We will end up having to paint over the ceiling because the cost of trying to strip off that lead paint is just above and beyond what is reasonable for this project. But in any case, the ceiling will still be preserved. You'll still be able to see what the original ceiling looked like. Now when you look closely at the ceiling, you'll see what look like round circles up there. And the knob and tube electrical wiring was connected there. We actually took down all the knobs, diagrammed where they all went so we would have an idea of how the electrical system worked in here. The reason we spent time doing that is because this is the first building in LeRoy Township to have electric. And it had it when it was first built years before anyone else in town had it. So it's kind of an important piece of history to preserve how electric was first installed in this building. And so we know just by how the ceiling is laid out, we can tell where everything was located. The lights were located on the ceilings, and get an idea of how the store was lit up. Now the store and the hotel both had electric lights in them, so I imagine that would have been a pretty grand sight for people in town who did not have electric to see this large building in the center of town all lit up at nighttime. So that probably would have been pretty amazing. Now I mentioned this was a store, and you can see here in the corner where the store shelving had been. And so in this case, it appears that this green, dark green color is the actual paint that was on here when the store was in use. You'll see a lighter green color in other parts of the building, but that was a later addition. That was a different coat of paint added later on. And so you can see here the shelving, and these lines carry all the way around the room. Even in the areas that have been repainted with the lighter green, you can see where shelving was in those areas as well. And then across the lower section of the wall, you can see where there was a counter that went almost the full length around the room. And that was pretty typical for any stores that I've seen in this area at that time, which was to have a lower counter that ran across the lower half of the wall and then shelving above it. And then they probably had another counter that was set out here further on the floor, that they would deal with customers there. We also found hooks on the ceiling here that probably would have been places where they would have hung merchandise from the ceiling and anything that they might be selling to get it up off the floor. So that was pretty neat as well. Now we're in the back part of the storeroom now, and there's some interesting history to talk about back here, and a lot of this we wouldn't have known really had we not decided to pull out all of the partitions that had been later added to this room, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But here in the back of the room, you can see that there originally had been double doors here in the back. We can tell that they were original to the store because of the unpainted wood underneath the plastic there and around the edge of the door. So we know that that molding had been on there when it was first built, and when you look at the molding that had been on there, it matches the molding that's in the rest of the building. So what my interpretation of this is that this was actually a loading area where they would bring merchandise in to the back of the store and load it in here. Perhaps they had a storeroom, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I'm not sure. But they would bring merchandise in here, probably horse and wagons would pull around the back, and they would probably unload right here. And so most of this was covered up, although half of it was used as a doorway later on as well, but now it's totally covered over. But it's an interesting little piece to show what that looked like. If you look over here, you'll see on the right side there is a small window, and then above it you can tell that a larger window had been in place there at one time, and at some point then that's been filled back in. So we know that when the store was first built, this was a much larger window, and this has been changed over the years. Over on this side, we can see where there was another window. And we know that that one was there when the store was first built as well, because this one you can see in the old photographs of the hotel. You can see a window right there. Now down below, you can see that it's been torn out and new studs put in there. We'll talk about why that is like that in a minute, but when the store was in operation, that wouldn't have been there at all. That would have been just part of the wall. Towards the front part of the building there are two windows that would have been on the side, but many people remember those windows, but they were not original to the building. The large window that's here on the right and the second window that used to be where the door there is were added much later. And in the early days, another large addition was added off the side of the building out here where the driveway is, actually. And right out in this part of the building would have been the Lewis Brothers store offices, sorry. The Lewis Brothers lumber office. And the Lewis Brothers had operations up on the mountain here, and they had a sawmill that moved across the mountain, and they kept their records in there. They did their business. They probably kept their business records, maybe even for the store in there, but that addition was later torn off the building. It was only a one-story addition, and we can see in the side of the building here is a stovepipe hole, so we're not sure. That might have been connected into that side of the building where that addition was. We can see a chimney in the coming out of that one-story office addition that probably heated that part of the building, but perhaps this opened into that chimney as well. Not quite sure. Now this was heated, while we're on that topic, this room was heated, and most of the hotel was actually heated by a furnace that was in the basement. And I believe it was a coal furnace. We found old pieces of coal in the crawl spaces and around the property. So probably a coal furnace, and the coal furnaces in those days were large, immense pieces of machinery that would sit in the basement. But whereas today we have fans that blow the heat up through ductwork, back then they just relied on heat rising up through vents, openings in the floor in order to heat the building. So they would advertise that the hotel was heated by a furnace, and probably that would have been a lot more, a lot nicer than just a fireplace or something of that nature. But that is really how they heated most of this building. But we can also see in other places where there were holes in the chimneys where they did apparently have small coal fire cast iron stoves as well. So excuse the pile of stuff we have here from our yard sale we recently had. But another part of the store in the back here was over here on the right side. You can see again where additional shelving was in the back. And it's hard to see in this picture, but the shelving continued on around to the right there. The lines were painted over later on. But on the bottom you can see where there were more counters that went around this side of the building, of the store as well. So we come to a part of the store that has been somewhat of a mystery for quite some time, but we recently figured out what the story behind this is. If you look at the ceiling, you can see that the ceiling here was cut out at one time, and then it's been filled back in and framed back in. Somewhat of a crude framing job, but it does the job, apparently. It's still up there. But this has been framed back in, and you can see, by the way, the original framing. There's original framing timbers up there, and the darker colored ones. And a lot of the original framing timbers for the floor joists in this ceiling right here, some of them are 3 inches wide. Some of them are 3 by 10s, 3 by 12s. They're just massive pieces of lumber because these guys had a sawmill and they were able to cut whatever they needed. But this opening in the ceiling was not here when the store first opened. And so it has been a mystery for quite some time why this was cut out. Some people remember when the stairway was here, and you can still see part of a shadow on the wall running up the wall right here. This was a stairs. It ran around. There's a landing right there, and then you can see it goes up to the second floor. So what we have in this corner is a stairway that was built approximately 4 years or so after the store opened. And apparently, according to the newspaper, the store was looking to expand, needed some more space. Now upstairs is a ballroom above this room, and we'll look at that in a minute. But this area was where they built a stairway up into the ballroom in order to make more space for the store. And again, that's all out of the newspapers from that time period. And so apparently the store functioned just on this first floor for the first 4 or so years, and the ballroom was used for entertainment purposes on the second floor during that time. But then the store decided to expand. They built a stairway up the corner here, opened up that floor, and made a whole second department upstairs and hired another person to work up there and to run that operation on the second floor. And so this was, as I often tell people, this was the Walmart of LeRoy, Pennsylvania, back in those times, because when you compare this with the other stores that were across the street from us, those stores were very small in comparison to this, and didn't have as wide of a selection as probably the Lewis brothers had, and certainly there were no stores in town that were 2 stories. So once they added this second story, that really set apart the Lewis brothers store from the Holcombs and the others that were doing business at the time. So we'll go up there in a minute and look at where that comes through the floor, but that's a little background on what that is. And we recently, as I mentioned, just found that out recently. So in later years, I'll give a little background on the room after the store closed. This building was sold in about 1918 to Dr. Bevan, Dr. Daniel Bevan, in here in LeRoy. He had an office in town, but he moved in here, and this part of the building was where his doctor's office was. Of course, he lived in the house in what had been the hotel, and but this section that we're looking at right here, which is kind of set apart on the right side by that change in paint color that runs down the wall. And then if you look at the ceiling, you can see an outline that runs around. Now, it appears that this front part of the building was his actual doctor's office, that he was the first one who split up the store to become separate rooms. And so this area that's shown was likely his actual office. He would have used the front doors. The storefront was still on there at that time. And this other section over here may have been a waiting room. I'm not totally sure, but it appears to have been built that way at the same time as this other room. When we stripped this area out, we found material on the walls that was kind of like a paneling type board that imitated what am I trying to think of? It imitated tile, I guess. And it sort of looked like what you would find maybe in a bathroom from that time, some of those early subway type tiles. And that's what it looked like. And it was kind of like a fiber board, early type of fiber board. And it was very popular. And I looked up the brand name, which was stamped on the back of it. And it said that it was popular in 1918. And so that gives us an idea that this was actually his doctor's office. So you can see the outline here on the floor of where the wall ran for that office, and turned right here. You can see the corner, and then it continued and ran on across that direction. Now, when we tore this wall out, being the oldest wall, approximately, I would say, in this area here, there was an old door that had been covered over, and that appears to have been possibly a later addition, so it wasn't original to the doctor's office necessarily. And so later on, Dr. Bevan didn't need so much space for his doctor's office, and so he decided to swap houses with Stanley Morse, who was down on Mill Street in the house next to the Grange Hall, which is now the museum. And Stanley Morse came up here. He had a funeral business, and he moved his funeral business into this building, and he began living in this building as well. And Dr. Bevan moved down to his house, where he needed much less space to run his practice. And so at that time, Stanley Morse did a lot of work on the building, and I would say did probably a lot of tearing out of original features of the building. Stanley was the one who took out this storefront that was here. He took off the front porch. He took off a dormer window on top of the house. He took down an extra chimney on top of the house. He made a whole lot of changes. And he also turned the back of the store here into a garage. Now, at the time that the place was being used as a funeral home, this garage door was not here. But this area here around these windows in the back corner was actually a garage door. It was cut open. When the funeral home was here, he did have a hearse, a motorized vehicle at that time, which was also used as an ambulance. But he didn't park it inside at that point. The garage had not been created by that time. And the funeral home was only here for 1.5 years, and then he moved it to Canton. But later on, he created a garage to park his own car in. They lived here until around 1954. And so you can see evidence of the work that he did, first of all, by installing a garage door here, which, by the way, is a very low garage door. I would say maybe 6.5, maybe 7 feet at the max. It's kind of a very small door. But then if you look down on the floor here, you can see evidence of him parking his car in here by the grease spots and oil drippings right here that are all along the floor. And they run up, and the floor is a little dusty right now, but you can see a little bit more up here. You can see how the floor gets darker, and we think that that's just from him having parked his car in here and maybe leaking oil as it was parked in here, and then towards the back, leaking oil or greasing the wheels, whatever, greasing the car as he had it in here. So that is what this part of the building then was used for. Now, when he pulled his car in here, it caused a little bit of damage to the building, but it's nothing that we can't live with. But if you look at the floor here, it may be hard to see on this video, but I think by parking his car in here, he caused the floor to settle. And you can kind of see it here. It settles towards each back corner. Each of the back corners are lower than the center. Now there's a center beam that runs down the middle here, about from the middle of the double doors there. It runs down the center. And this back portion of the room, probably right up to approximately where this heating vent is in the floor, that back portion is actually just a crawl space, and barely even a crawl space. The rest of it is a full basement under this part of the building, but this part is a crawl space, and so I think he thought he could get away with parking his car in here, but the weight of that car, in my opinion, caused this portion of the building to settle. Now, there's no plans to do any tearing out and changing of that. It seems to be very solid, and so we're not going to do anything about of tearing that out. We are going to try to level up the floor. We're putting down a hardwood floor over this floor because the original floor is in such bad condition. But we're going to try to level out the floor by adding furring strips and so on in order to try to even that out. But that is how that came about. And so Morses were here for a number of years, as I mentioned. In the front part of the storeroom here, Harriet Morse, Stanley's wife, had a shop where she sold crystal, I believe, and other gifts, and that was in the front part. And the funeral home, the actual viewing rooms, were in the other part of the house, and so that's how they used the house when they were here. Now, when the next owners came along, which would be Victor Sherwood and his wife, they also used this back portion briefly, I think, as a garage. The stairway in the corner was still here then, but it was their intention to open a personal care type facility here. And so they closed up the garage door. They took out the stairway that was here, and then they closed this all into separate individual rooms. And what they did, first of all, is they came in and dropped the ceiling down approximately 4 feet. And you can see the difference if you look from the bottom of the wainscoting there all the way down. You can sort of see a water stain running along the wall, kind of right here. And so above there was all closed up, and that was just a crawl space from the time that they did this up until we bought the property. There was a 4-foot crawl space above the ceiling. And then they divided this whole store area up into rooms for the personal care home. And so when you look at this, what they did is this back portion here on the side that's not covered here in plastic was where there was an entrance door. There was then a laundry room in this area. This room over here, which we have kept, was a bathroom that was added in, and this is now becoming the handicap bathroom for the museum. We're required to have a handicap bathroom, and the other location where there is a bathroom on the first floor is not big enough to be a handicap bathroom. And so it was necessary for us to put this handicap bathroom in this location. It also allowed us to bring in heating ducts and other things that were needed in this area anyway. And so here on to the right, there was another room And this room you can actually still see the outline of on the floor. So in this corner was a room. Then there was another room in this area. And then there was a smaller room set back a little bit further in this area where Dr. Bevan had his part of his office. And then across the front of the building was one large room that was entered by the door there in the corner. And then, again, where I mentioned behind that plywood was the original door into the store. That became a wider door and opened up as a hallway where you would walk you straight in, and then there was a hallway that ran straight down the middle of this room to that back door. And so that's how the building really had been up until the previous owners purchased the property, and they made some slight changes and made an apartment out of this. And when we came, we then went through and completely stripped everything out that had been done in here and took everything right back to the original walls. And that's what we have here. And so now this room is going to be a exhibit room, and of course the handicap bathroom there as well. But this will be the main exhibit room. So it's a pretty large area. In fact, it's almost as large as the one whole floor of our current museum. So we'll certainly have a whole lot more space in this room. Now people wonder what we're going to do in here. Are we going to leave this wainscoting on the wall? And because there are a number of building codes that are different today than what we used to have back when this building was first built, there are different things that have to be done to this building to make it back into a commercial building again. And one of the things is to fire rate the walls. Now we probably could have gotten away with not doing it in here, but I wouldn't be comfortable with that, because if there ever was a fire, this would be just a large box of wood and would be very easy to burn. So it is not something that we want to keep. The wainscoting will remain on the walls to help give some strength to the walls. The wainscoting is a good 3/4 of an inch thick or more. But we will be putting drywall over the walls. As I mentioned again, the crown molding will be restored. We'll be putting the crown molding back just as it had been. And we'll have the original ceiling will be in place. We'll be repairing the holes in the ceiling. And there will be hardwood on the floor. And so this will be one large exhibit space. Another reason for not having kept what is on the walls is because of all of the holes that are in the walls. Everyone over the years has made their own modifications. As I've pointed out, there is a garage door. We have the windows here. We have 2 windows that were cut into the building down here, and then one window was taken out and replaced by a door. And then the whole front of the room almost is totally missing the wainscoting and totally mismatched, and pieces missing and holes cut into it. A doorway is over in the corner that is not going to be there. And plus we've added the handicap bathroom here. And we have had to do electrical, which has required us to cut into the walls as well. So there are just too many things going on. Here's where the old doors were. There's holes cut back in the back when the laundry room was here for vent vent holes and stuff for the dryers and so on. So there's just too much going on here. And so we have documented what's in here, taken measurements, doing things like making this video to help us remember what it was like. But you can't preserve everything, and there are aspects, parts of this building that deserve more time in restoration than this particular room. That are those places, those rooms are a little less, what's the word? A little less damaged, I guess. And so that's what we're up to with this. So that's a little look at this room. Everyone, we're up in the ballroom here in the old hotel, and we're looking at the portion in the floor that was cut out and made into a stairway about 4 years after the store opened. And so in later time, when the Sherwoods moved in, this part of the floor was filled back in. But you can see on the wall here, you can see where the stairway came up from downstairs. You can see on the wall, on the wainscoting, how there used to be a wall put in place here. It was right in this area. And then you can see the molding cut out there. And if you go up to the ceiling, you can see the molding cut out at that location. And then if you look at the ceiling, you can see how the stairway here was all boxed in, probably to keep the heat downstairs. And then it came down, and a partition ran down this side. And they cut through and ran down to the floor. So that's what this area here in the corner of the room was the stairway built up from the store in order to use this upstairs as part of another department of the store. So I'll give you a quick look at the ballroom here. There are some things to be done up here, but the ballroom is probably the least touched room over the years. It's not been modified, so other than adding some ceiling fans and changing out the lights, this room is pretty close to being original. Now, the walls were stained in the corner here back at the time that the roof leaked several years ago, but that, for the most part, that's plaster damage. There's some refinishing of the wood to be done up there, but to make this a public space, we have to fix the plaster and to drywall the areas of the wall that are currently plaster. The wainscoting areas will remain just as they are. The ceiling, which is beautiful, will remain just as it is. And so again, this area is above the store. And all of the wood is taken right off from Barkley Mountain and taken right from the trees off from the mountain, brought down here into town, and in Rancy Morse's planing mill is where most of this material was created. All right. So there's some background on this part of the building, the store and the ballroom area. And we have been working on turning this building into our new museum. We acquired the building just the very end of October 2015, and we've worked about a year and a half on it. And there's a lot to do to turn it into a public building again. But as you can see by the wood work that still remains, the fact that there's even a ballroom in this building of this nature, this is not something you find in other places, and it has been left intact over the years, and certainly is worth the effort of restoring it and making it available for use again. So we are at the point now where we are fundraising again, writing grant funding in order to raise the remaining funds that are needed to finish the building. The work that we have done up to this point has been changing over mechanical things, installing new heating and cooling, changing and adding some of the electrical, and so on. And so now we're to the point where we're going to be finishing floors, drywall, and trim on the inside, and then on the outside installing handicapped accessibility and fire escapes, sidewalks, and things that are required by code to be done. So thank you very much for joining me and learning a little bit more about the building, and we look forward to possibly doing this again. Thanks.